Welcome to Unexpected Points. I am your host, Kevin Cole. I am joined this week by Jason Fitzgerald on Twitter at Jason_OTC, proprietor of, I would say, one of the best resources out there for cap-minded NFL fans, overthecap.com. And don't go to those other guys. You may know about some other guys. Don't go there. Don't go there. Just go to overthecap.com. We won't mention any names of anyone else there. And he also hosts, and I was just mentioning this to Jason before we jumped on, my weekend really podcast listening most of the time, because it comes out on Fridays. That's his own Over the Cap podcast. And I'm really enjoying the fact that you've dedicated yourself, because I know you work a normal job. You've dedicated yourself this year for the last several months to doing that on pretty much on a weekly basis. So thank you so much, Jason, for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So let's get into, I want to talk with you because I know you are a long suffering Jets fan, and the Jets, for not surprisingly, bad reasons, have been in the news a little bit recently. I mean, obviously we have, coming off of last week, the victory. I was about to say the loss to the Rams, but a victory is is a loss in their circumstance. I know you watch the games because I see you tweeting out your frustrations during the game. So you probably know what's going on with the Jets better than anyone. So from a high level here, let's just assume that the number one pick is off the table. What is your opinion on how dire of a situation that is, not having that number one pick?
I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, I'm not going to change course at all. You need a quarterback. I can't see any way that you go into this next year and say, we're locked into Sam Darnold for the next 2 years. Because if you don't take a quarterback, if you take a right tackle or you take a defensive end or something like that, you basically are saying, well, we're going to not only have Sam Darnold next year, but we're going to buy that option and we're going to have him for the year after that as well. And you're pretty much going nowhere. So yeah, it stinks as a fan to not get that number one pick. All the seasons the Jets have been bad, you haven't had that opportunity. You come away with like Keyshawn Johnson years ago, or some other players where you traded out of that pick. But you need a quarterback, and it's a quarterback draft from what people tell me, that you're looking at 3 top quarterbacks pretty much going, I guess, top 5 or so. So yeah, you lose that guy that they say is a surefire bet, but you need a quarterback. And if it's a quarterback heavy draft, I just don't see how that changes anything for the team.
It's interesting because I've been surprised, and you've probably been surprised. I noticed you put out the highly scientific Twitter poll about what the Jets did. Nothing. It's the highest rigor of peer review on that, and I believe only. Well, two of there were 3 choices. 2 of them were kind of similar, because I think 2 of them were not drafting a quarterback, and I think the one that was taking a quarterback was only 30-something%. Now, I'm shocked when I see stuff like that. Although I've heard people like the Colin Cowherd of the world, that aside. But he spoke with Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson said, I probably would not take a quarterback at number 2 there because of what he's seeing, and that seems to be building up a lot of momentum. I agree with you that this draft looks like it has quarterbacks, right? So Fields is number 2, I think, on our big board. Zach Wilson's number 3. If you look at like Mel Kiper, who supposedly should have his finger on the pulse of what's going on, Fields is number 3 on his big board. Dane Brugler at the Athletic, I think he's number 2 there. So this seems to be more about people's opinion of Sam Darnold in a way than their opinion of Fields, and I just don't.
I guess partially. I mean, there's still a subset of the Jets population, the fan base, whatever limited fan base that's left, that still believes in Darnold. I think that the reaction that was there, especially because when I put that out there, was on it was right after the game, and even now, early in the week, I think people are just hurt. You've had all this time. Once the Jets were like 0-6, and it all just became this, tank for Trevor kind of bit. I think people were so tuned in on that, and they've bought in so much to the fact that this is the next generational quarterback, that you just feel everyone else is just not worth it. And it's kind of weird because a couple of years ago, Mike McCagnon makes just a blind trade up to basically get to almost the same spot the Jets are in now. And people were praising him like, oh, this is great. We're going to get a quarterback. You didn't even know who you were getting. I mean, at the time, most people thought it probably would have been Josh Allen that would have gone to the Jets at that point. And I think people would have been disappointed then, maybe not now, but at that time, people would have been maybe a little bit disappointed that Josh Allen would have been the guy that ended up being selected. But I think it's just that everyone was so on this train that they were getting the next Peyton Manning, the next whatever, and you're not going to get that anymore. So it's like you're going back to the typical kind of 50-50 or 60-40, whatever that proposition is for getting that highly drafted quarterback that he's going to work out and help your franchise. I'd like to talk people off the ledge on it. I mean, yeah, there's Peyton Manning. Since then, I mean, who are your best quarterbacks? Brady, Rodgers, Mahomes, none of those guys are the top pick in the draft. And if you look at a lot of the drafts, you find plenty of good players, number 3, number 4, number 10, all in that range. So yeah, is it a little bit harder? It's not as safe maybe, but you're going to find a good player. You hope you're going to find a good player at least. I'd be really disappointed if they didn't take a quarterback. I'd really be disappointed if they went in a different direction.
Yeah, I think you're right. It may just be a relative opinion off of what people are thinking about Lawrence, who, maybe Andrew Luck is probably the equivalent for the last guy that was seen at this sort of level. And, even Luck by some measures wasn't the best quarterback in his class, right? If you look at someone like Russell Wilson. So yeah, there are a lot of quarterbacks who are out there. Now, if we just explore what the other options may be, you could take a player at 2, right? You could take another player. It doesn't seem like there's a Chase Young, Myles Garrett type of player in this draft, although I'm not a draft nick, so I don't really know. But those also seem like very difficult to have value there. Or you can trade out, as what I've also heard people talking about. My issue with that is the Jets have other picks in the first round. They have other picks the next year, and you have to have someone willing to trade for a quarterback in that situation, I'd assume, right? So you'd be passing on a quarterback when someone else it decided that one of those quarterbacks is worthy of a number 2 pick.
Yeah, I guess that would be similar to, was it the Browns that?
Yeah, the Browns.
The one year where they dropped out from 2, where
yeah.
they were going to get Wentz. Or I guess Wentz is the guy they would have ended up with, and they dropped out from that. So I guess it would be a similar situation to that. And yeah, you have to find that team that's going to be willing to move up, because if someone's moving up for a non-quarterback, you're not going to get the value to really make it that worthwhile. You're just going to upset the fan base at that point even more, because you're passing on a quarterback to drop down, a couple spots. Let's say Carolina wanted to jump up 2 or 3 spots to move into there. You need to make sure that it's a team like that that's going to pick a quarterback to where you can try to get. No one's ever going to get that RG3 haul that the Rams got years ago, but something close to that. You're getting 2 first-round picks back and something else. And I guess that's a possibility as well, that they could do that.
Yeah, the question would be, I think when you're looking at your charts, right? So everyone has their charts for up at the top of the draft, and typically those are people drafting a quarterback, so they're going to give more. So then you just can't get. It's really tough to get out of those picks, just like you mentioned. Now, one of the things to think about with the Jets, and what do you think about the roster outside of the quarterback? Because the theory behind drafting someone there or getting a boatload of picks is that there's so many needs throughout the roster, and it's going to take so long otherwise to turn things around that it may be worth having Darnold hoping for upside and then being able to surround him with so much talent because of the current state of the roster.
The roster stinks. So, I mean, there's no sugarcoating the Jets roster. The Jets roster is a left tackle, a defensive tackle, and maybe a wide receiver, and that's it. I mean, they don't have anybody there. So I can see why some people would think that. I just don't know if you can get anywhere with that. If you're looking at, even if you're looking at that long game, because that's a really long game, you're still not going to surround Sam Darnold with talent next year. Most of the stuff you're going to get in return, you'll drop down a couple of spots this year, and you're probably going to pick up another first rounder the year after that. And maybe some other picks down the line, depending on how active you are in a trade. I don't think that benefits them now, which means Sam Darnold's still going to look pretty bad. I don't know how attractive they're also going to be in free agency to, attract people to the team. I think that's I think the thing with losing Lawrence is that it probably impacts them in a search for a coach, and I think it impacts them in trying to attract free agents to the team. So you couple that all together. If you trade down and you push off making a lot of these picks until 2022 while still banking on Sam Darnold, I don't know if you're Joe Douglas, if you're going to see 2023, if you come off another season where you've doubled down on Sam Darnold and you're 4-12 and you still look terrible. So I find that one just a hard path to go down. Even though, yeah, in theory, do have so many holes, they need a lot of draft picks to kind of fill them up. And just with the way the quarterback position is, I just can't see how they do it.
Now, I read an article today by Connor Hughes, who works for The Athletic covering the Jets, and his take was, this is assuming Adam Gase is gone, which I think is a pretty safe assumption at this point. He's done his job all the way until losing the number one pick. Frank Gore, though, it's bad for Frank Gore's continuing career, but I'm sure he'll be okay. So if they're going with the coach, his take was you let the coach make that decision, because that, I don't know if for job security purposes, I don't know if that's a good idea. But what about this theory of alignment and everyone being on the same? That's the buzzword. That's the buzzword now. It's between coaches and front offices having alignment, which in a lot of cases now means the coach has the power. Honestly, in these circumstances, like Shanahan and probably going to end up being the case with Rule in Carolina, when they just got rid of Marty Herney. They're talking alignment, which to me makes me think coach is the boss, basically, is what alignment means there. So what about that? What about that aspect? Who they're going to bring in a head coach?
That is an old school philosophy. I mean, that is the way a lot of teams are run. We, going back to Shanahan's father, that's the way those teams were kind of run. You would bring in at that point your general managers and work either the contract guy or the quote unquote draft Nick, I guess, that's just going to help you do some scouting that's there. The Jets need alignment in terms of getting their GM and their head coach on the same page. I don't know if I'd be in favor of the head coach coming in and just running the whole show. I don't know, based on what Douglas's strengths are supposed to be. I don't even know how that would really work out. I'm not sure if he would be even the right GM for that role. It's like, if you're going to go down that path, you almost think the Jets should just be blowing the whole thing up. You bring in that whole culture changer head coach type and have him do what's going to happen in Carolina right now, where basically he's going to go in there and he's going to hire his own GM to help him with the things he doesn't know how to do or he doesn't want to, bother himself with. That'd be a kind of a tough one. Now the Jets do have a very different structure than other teams when it comes to hiring. They're not going to let the general manager hire the head coach, or at least they haven't done that in a long time. They have it to where basically the head coach is going to answer to Woody or Chris Johnson, whichever one is going to be in charge. And the GM is going to answer independently to him. And we've pretty much seen it since they fired Tannenbaum. It's just backstabbing in that organization. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how that would play out, but I guess I could see the logic in saying you bring in the coach and you say you're doing everything. Here, I don't know. It just seems like an odd setup for the way the Jets have been.
So what like I said, you understand the setup there a little bit better. So how have they gone about the head coaching search? Because I don't know if I remember much about Adam Gase other than the fact that Peyton Manning said something.
Yeah,
and okay, we'll take them.
Jets,
is this like a search firm sort of thing going on there, or what?
Typically they end up going to either search firms. That's how they've gotten a couple of their guys. And they'll also bring in the old executive / consultant, the Bill Polians, Charlie Casserleys, who, obviously long careers in the NFL. I don't know how much of the pulse of the current NFL those guys kind of have now. And part of what happens with them too is you almost get the feeling the last guy that Johnson's talked to on the phone is the one that has the most pull with them. And it's like Peyton.
That sounds
Manning
like Jimmy Haslam.
The
Jimmy Haslam stories are very similar to that.
Yeah, I think that's basically what it is, except they don't get fired after 1 year. They have a little bit of a longer rope before they get fired. But yeah, that's basically what it is. They had Matt Rule pretty much ready to go in New York a couple of years ago when they hired Gase, and they basically said, "Well, if you're going to take this job, we want to hire everybody for you." And he was like, "Oh, I'm not going to have that. I'm not going to deal with that. This is a dysfunctional organization. I'm not going to go down that kind of path at all." And next thing you know, Peyton Manning's like, "Hey, let me tell you about this Adam Gase guy. He's great." And they trot him in there, and I'm just banging my head against the wall. I'm like, how do you bring this guy in? But that's pretty much how it works. And when they did that hire, Mike McCagnon was still the general manager. And again, when you get into the backstabbing stuff, Gase was able to maneuver himself kind of into power there in just a couple of months. And by the time the summer rolled around, they fired the general manager because I don't even remember what the excuse was. He wasn't a good organizational fit anymore. He didn't talk with enough of the people and communicate. It's like, where was this the last 4 years? Why don't you get rid of him in free agency? Why don't you get rid of him before the draft? You let him spend all this money and really blow up a lot of the stuff with your salary cap for a short period of time and bring in these draft picks. And then you fire him because Adam Gase said, you probably are better off firing him and hiring somebody else. And that's pretty much the way that team has gone. And that's the way that they approach it. So I would guess if they do fire Gase, it'll be the same kind of thing. They'll get one of these guys who's got some experience and they'll talk with them, and the GM will have some input on it, but ultimately it's going to be a Johnson's decision based on candidates that come from consultants, search firm, whatever.
And okay, so assuming they're bringing the new coach, let's say even that they draft a quarterback, the Jets draft a quarterback who they're looking for. As far as cap space is concerned, I mean, the Jets are right up there near the top. What do you think about the landscape in 2021? Because, I mean, now there's talk. There was talk before that the cap may go down to whatever it was, 165, 175. Now it's maybe 195 there. For teams like the Jets who have that space, is this going to be a year for them to go out and attack the market?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, it gives you an opportunity for guys who are looking to make a more of a cash grab than anything else. You can offer them probably a better financial outcome than just about any other team. Even if it's just on a 1-year contract, you can probably front load it in ways that nobody else can do that. So I think teams like that, teams like the Jaguars, teams that do have that cap space, if they're creative with their sales pitches to these players, yeah, I think you could have a big advantage in getting players just because of that. Yeah, as the cap rises, if it comes up closer to 195, it's probably not as much of an advantage for the Jets then, because then it's only going to be a couple of teams that are in really bad shape with the cap at that point in time. But if it's 175, yeah, I think those kind of teams that normally wouldn't get certain players, they're going to have a chance at it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a discount that players are willing to take to go somewhere that they think they can win. So the Jets are not going to be one of those places. Is this going to be a phenomenon that you see a relative attractiveness going up in the middle of the market, at the bottom of the market, at the top of the market? Or is it not really going to segment that way?
Well, the top of the market's not going to change. These guys who are star players, teams are going to find ways to fit them in their cap. If it means paying them a $1 million base salary with a $40 million signing bonus to make the cap hit low, they're going to do that. So nothing is going to happen there. I think all those guys that are in that, $5 to $9, $3 to $9 million a year category, I think those are the players that, they might get pinched a little bit next year. So those are the kind of players I think that the teams like the Jets will probably have a little bit more access to when they normally in most years probably would not.
Were you surprised that more of the veteran middle market guys weren't cut this season, and then seeing if teams could roll that cap into next year? I know that was something I
Yeah.
thought was going to
Yep.
happen, but it hasn't really happened that much. So I don't know if teams know that they may get a little relief cap wise next year, or what the situation is.
Yeah, I thought more of that would happen. I thought more teams would be proactive with planning for next year. And the only teams really that did it are Dallas and Philadelphia. Those are the only teams that were proactive with doing anything with their contracts really for next year at all. And you didn't see a lot of players released in the summer. I thought there would be. Maybe partially it was their agreements on the COVID stuff didn't come until much later on. Sometimes, who knows, maybe there was even discussion of that being like, if we get this in place, does this prevent there being the summer bloodbath? And, maybe there was some kind of silent agreement somewhat about doing some things like that. So I don't know, but yeah, I thought that was going to happen more this year. I thought there was going to be a lot of players that were forced into pay cuts. There was only a handful, really wasn't much more than usual for the summertime pay cuts, and not as many players were released as I thought would be released either.
Yeah, man. Another interesting phenomenon we'll see for 2021. You mentioned the Eagles specifically as someone who has been proactive. I mean, they're one of the handful of teams that are in real trouble from a cap perspective. I guess you could put the Saints probably in that bucket, and I guess the Steelers are probably in that bucket too.
Steelers are there, and the Falcons. Those are the four teams that are going to have problems next year.
Okay, so what is the least bad way of getting out of this situation? Because it's probably going to involve some cuts. It's probably going to involve some restructures. But in that case, you may be holding on to players who for even longer than their useful life cycle.
Yeah, I don't think there really is a good way out of it. I mean, I think you just look at this and say, there's no way anybody could have planned for this. The situations they wouldn't have been ideal, but they wouldn't have been atrocious if the cap grew as normal. The Falcons would have been okay. The Steelers would have been okay. It's just the Saints and the Eagles that really would have been over if the cap, was 215 or 210, like everyone expected it would have been. Um, so I think you just chalk it up to that. And I think for the most part, you just do the same kind of stuff that you're doing where, yeah, does it make it harder to release those players in the future? In a sense it does, but you don't really have a lot of other options. So all you're really doing is just deferring, the point in time where you're going to have to put that dead money down on your salary cap anyway, especially if you're talking about players with guaranteed salaries. It's not like you can really get out of those guarantees. So you're just deferring it to a time when the cap gets back to normal. Um, on an individual team basis, I mean, the Steelers clearly have a big decision they're going to have to make with Roethlisberger. He's got a $41 million cap charge next year. Last season of his deal. Do you really want to extend him? I wouldn't think so. I don't think you want to cut him. I think this is where you start to have those retirement talks and see if you can get an exit a la Eli Manning or something like that. With that kind of team, and then the Eagles and the Saints. I don't know what the Saints are going to do. The Saints just are going to have all kinds of decisions they're going to have to make with that roster. The Eagles, I think they probably had a plan that's been really thrown out of whack because of the Carson Wentz's fall this year. They couldn't have expected that in a million years. And part of where they're at, they needed to be able to restructure Carson Wentz's deal really to get the kind of cap flexibility that they wanted in the future. And I'm going to guess they'll still do that if they can't find a trade partner. And I don't know what the Saints. That's a much tougher one. But I think for the most part, you're just going to be kicking money to 2022 for the players that you know for a fact you want them on your roster in 21. I think you just push it to 22, and if it means more dead money that year, it means more dead money that year. It's just the reality of the situation, and you just couldn't plan for it.
Now, I think part of this phenomenon has been a shift. Well, I don't know if it's a shift in the league, but I've heard about it much more where you have this window, this championship window. Now, for some people like the Saints, it's a longer window because of Drew Brees, but they finally have the surrounding talent to really have that window to go all in. Often you saw it being talked about in regards to having this rookie quarterback. While they're on that contract, I think like a Mitch Trubisky, even though he was Trubisky, he had some promise at that point in time. So they said, let's trade for Khalil Mack. Let's push forward there. I think the Rams have done that again. They've kind of doubled down on it with Jalen Ramsey. The Eagles were doing that. So what do you think about this? The give and take between trying to maximize out in a short window for a championship, which it seems like a lot of these teams are doing, versus the longer time horizon and the tension between those two things.
Yeah, I kind of like the philosophy, kind of going for it. The Bears made some really stupid moves, but I think their idea of saying, okay, we've got this rookie quarterback, we're going to make a trade for Mac, we're going to be really aggressive. I think that's the right way to approach it. I don't think that sorry about that.
No
I
worries.
don't think that you can, I think that's better than going through this process of where you've got this rookie quarterback, for example, and you sit and you wait and you wait and you wait. And then when he finally develops in the fourth year, it's like, okay, well, now we can do it. And then you realize just from a budgetary standpoint, oh, wait, this guy's going to cost us $40 million a year now. Now we got to set aside money for that. And then it just, you waste too much time. And the way that, the way that teams cycle through players right now, I mean, it's a complete roster turnover within 2, 3 years anyway. So I don't know, other than for a couple positions, I don't think you can really have a big long time horizon. I think everything is in these little 3 year windows, and it's just how successful your quarterback is in those windows and how you can maneuver their salaries, and the cap structure to where you can continue to add to your football team even when those guys are going to make more money. You know, the Mahomes contract, nobody else is going to do a deal like that in the NFL. But I think that's the kind of deal that you look at something like that and you say, okay, that's the right way to approach it. If we can find, you know, any other players to do deals like that, that's the one way that you can get long-term stability at that position, and you know exactly how the numbers are going to play out for such a long period of time. Um, to where you can really plan out how you're going to build out the rest of that roster. It's completely different than what you see in Houston, where you're talking about a 4 year extension to where you have very limited cost certainty because you're only talking about, you know, 3 years with Watson before someone's going to say, hey, you got to give him a raise. He wants a new deal. So I don't know if that's ever going to come to a head. You know, obviously Dallas tried something like that with Dak Prescott, to get that longer term deal, and it led just to the 1 year franchise tag because they couldn't agree on length. But I could see teams trying to push a little bit more on the timeline for those quarterback contracts and seeing what they can do in terms of guarantees or something to make it attractive enough, kind of the way they did with Mahomes, to get the players to say yes to the deal, even though for some of them it wouldn't be in their best interest. And for other players, I mean, it would blow up. I mean, if you had Wentz on a 10 year deal, you know, that might that might be really, really bad, you know, if he had the same kind of guarantee structure as Mahomes has. But I think that's, you know, that's the risk that you take as an organization with the quarterback. And I think that's something more teams need to look at in the future.
You know, the Mahomes contract, at least for me, I mean, kind of came out of nowhere as far as the length is concerned there, because the talk over the summer was with Deshaun Watson wanting 3 years, I think was the talk that he
Yeah.
wanted, which
Yep.
which seems kind of ridiculous. You know, he wanted 3 years. Prescott wanted 4 years instead of 5 years. Wilson took a relatively short-ish sort of deal on his extension. And they were trying to avoid becoming like the Aaron Rodgers of the past, where you get this big extension, it lasts for a long time, and then, you know, in a blink of an eye, you have inferior quarterbacks who are jumping you in the market. So, like, what happened with that Mahomes contract? Was this a deal
I don't
where
know.
his agent was Lee Steinberg, right? Is this?
Yeah.
I
So
don't like. I don't know what's going on. It seems so against what other agents are trying to
it
do.
was, when that deal came down, so yeah, it was out of left field. Like never in a million years would I expected that. And yeah, I was getting text messages left and right, like, what is going on here? Like, what is happening? You know, there was craziness when the deal first came out and people were talking about these numbers and the length. And next thing you know, I think it was Florio or Schefter. One of them is like, well, I'm sure it's tied to the franchise tag, tied to the
Yeah.
average of the top play, something like that. I'm like, no, none of these people do these deals with these automatic raises in them anymore. And, you know, then it comes out like a couple hours later, no, it has nothing to do with that. And you get the numbers and it's like, he did a $39 million deal and then a $50 million deal, basically two little contracts rolled into one. You know, the only thing I could think of realistically is Lee Steinberg comes from another generation. You know, his generation of football really was the 1990s and early 2000s. That was his time frame. And that generation, that was the way quarterback contracts were done. It wasn't this race for the most guarantees. It wasn't the race for the necessarily the biggest annual value. Even it was like, who's going to be the first $100 million quarterback? You know, and you had Brett Favre, you know, was under contract for like 12 years. Donovan McNabb was like a 10-year deal. And that's all I could think of is maybe they kind of played back to that whole, you know, this is the face of the franchise. You're building a legacy here. That this is more than just gaining money. That this is a guy who is looking to become the greatest quarterback of all time. This is the place to do it. Let's just get this done. You know, let's have him under contract forever so we can build a great team around him. And that's all I could really think of, because there's no other agents right now that would have done that kind of deal. Everything had gone in the other direction, and this was, this was a complete curveball that I think caught every single team, every single other agent, just everybody off guard.
Yeah, I mean, it's not on the same level, but it kind of reminds me of like you're saying, more of an old school thing, like Magic Johnson in 19, I think it was 1981, he signed a 25-year deal for $25 million, which is just
Yep.
like the worst possible decision you could make in light of what's going on. And I think Watson could end up with more money over the next 10 years than Mahomes. And
I'm sure he will. I mean, even if you look at someone like a Kirk Cousins, who's doing that short term. If you look at who's the highest paid player over like the last 3, 4 years, it's Kirk Cousins because he's constantly going in there and redoing these contracts at this point. So it's like, okay, I'll do 28 million a year, but if I'm getting back to free agency in 2 years or 3 years after that, and the Vikings just open an extension, they're going to front load that deal. Well, now that's going to make me higher paid than all these other guys. So essentially, he signed himself a much bigger contract by doing it that way. And yeah, Watson's going to end up in that same kind of category because he's going to get right back into free agency in a couple of seasons.
yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I'm not the biggest fan of some of the moves that Brett Veach has made in Kansas City, like trading and signing Frank Clark and Sammy Watkins, continuing to bring him back and drafting the running back. But he has some magic when it comes to these contract negotiations. 'Cause I think even Chris Jones took a pretty good deal relative to what would have happened on the market. So he's kudos to him there. Well, I want to move a little bit further down the quarterback market. What what is your opinion on these guys? Whether it's the Jimmy G was one after the Super Bowl that people were, we should trade. You should get rid of him, and then you should start over. Goff, you should get rid of him. You should start over. Wentz, they're saying that about that now, but he's objective. He's objectively awful. Like as in comparison to those other guys. Like, what is it about fans that they just want to turn over that position? It seems like at 20 in the high $20 million a year or something like that.
Yeah, there's no upside to those players. So it's like you go around the league and you watch the Drew Breeses of the world who year after year are pretty good. You watch the Mahomes a whole different level, but
Yeah.
you watch some of these players where the team is successful every year. Aaron Rodgers teams in Green Bay pretty successful year after year, and you're basically the Matt Staffords of the world. Once every 4 years or so, you have a playoff run in you, and that's really it. And I think people just get discouraged with the quarterback position because they just don't see the upside there. The Garoppolo deal, I didn't like that one for a couple of reasons. But a big reason is just there was no body of work to justify making him the highest paid player at the time. When they did that, it was 5 games with San Francisco, 3 games with New England, maybe. I mean, that's why they wanted to get away from those old rookie contracts, was because there was no body of work and they were buying into a top 10 deal. But with the guys like a Jared Goff, they're market contracts. I mean, that's they are what they are. If it was me running a team, I think what more of these teams need to do, and it's hard to do because it's the most criticized moves that there could be, is if you get a guy like a Goff and you watch him play and you go, okay, he's decent. All right. He's not really great. He's not awful. I think you have to start looking at the draft at that point in time and saying, you know what, we need to do really what the Eagles just did with Hurts, or what the Packers did with Love, bringing him in, or what they did years ago with bringing in Aaron Rodgers. And I know that those are a little different. Those are quarterbacks that are kind of getting towards the end of their careers. But I think it's getting that pipeline of talent ready to come in to where when you get to year 5 on the quarterback or year 4 on the quarterback, you at least have another option on your roster to where you can say, okay, you know what? We can either commit $35 or $30 million a year to this guy, or we can turn to a rookie, see if we can trade this guy off for picks or whatever. We're going to have a lot more salary cap flexibility in the future to build a better team around them. Nobody's really done that. Nobody tries to do it, I guess, in part because there's no secondary market for quarterbacks out there either. There was a time where there would be some quarterbacks, I guess, floating around in free agency, and now there's never anybody. Nobody goes there. It's like you have your starters who are all making 25 million plus, and then your next level of player is like Ryan Fitzpatrick. So I guess that probably makes it difficult for some teams as well. And it is that fear of the unknown. I guess turning to a draft pick, just blindly when you have someone that's decent. Uh, but again, I would think if you have someone in your training camp that you're watching preseason, then you're evaluating every day, you would have a much better idea as to, how that player can fit in your offense versus paying big money for some of these other players.
Well, I guess the question is where you address that in the draft, right? So if you have a team that can compete, let's say like the Rams, I mean, can you address that even in the late first round? I mean, when the Eagles drafted Hurts, which was in the 50s, I think, so it wasn't at the beginning of the second round, fans were, throwing their arms
You're,
up and screaming about
you're,
wasting on what is probably not going to be that great of a player anyway at that point in the draft. I mean, you could hit, but you're probably not going to hit on that point. So that would be the question: is where do you address it?
Yeah, it's and that's a good question too, because again, where you get into where are your best prospects, it's in the top 10, and you're not going to get into the top 10 if you're a decent football team. And yeah, everyone's going to go crazy if you waste one of those picks that on that player. The way that I kind of look at it, and I know you can't spin it, but the way that I look at it is, at the worst, you've bought yourself a 4-year backup. A backup quarterback is going to cost you $4 million or so to bring in someone like Matt Schaub, or Matt Schaub's probably 2 million, but players that are going to cost you $2 to $4 million. Hurts probably is going to cost the Eagles 1.5 million a year. So the way that I look at it is, at the worst, you got yourself a backup quarterback that actually has upside versus these old broken down veterans that you probably don't want to ever bring into a game other than for a couple snaps here and there. So that's the way that I would try and spin it. Of course, on the radio and online, everyone's going to kill you for it. I mean, the Hurts thing was, it was crazy. Now, of course, everyone's like in love because he's got 2 decent games under his belt. But yeah, I think more teams have to try to do that. And I think what would happen is, if you ever have one team or 2 teams where it does work out for them, to where if Dallas, for example, had drafted somebody 2 years ago, I'm not sure if there's anyone that would have been there, but let's say they took somebody 2 years ago, and where they could have turned around and said, all right, you know what? We're going to put the franchise tag on Dak Prescott, and we're going to trade him. We're going to get 2 first-round picks back for trading him to another team, and we're ready to hand it off to this guy, and this guy comes in and gets them to the playoffs. I think then you'd see more teams start to think about doing it. But I think until a team is really successful doing it, with the young quarterback trade-off versus the, Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes and Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers kind of bit, I guess you won't see it. But I think you need 1 or 2 teams to just get successful and just, give it a shot and be successful with it. And then you might be able to spin it, a lot better. But yeah, someone's gonna do it, and they're just gonna get annihilated for it and possibly lose a job. Who knows?
Well, I guess part of this is the contracts too for these starters, right? I mean, a lot of them have this have a ton of dead money on it. So it's a situation where if you hit on this backup, then you're in this Carson Wentz type of situation where you're going to have to take a $35 million cap hit in order to trade him away. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but I think teams were very against doing that in the past. They're starting to warm up maybe a little bit to the sunk cost issue of it.
Yeah, I think so. I think part of that too is, now the contracts have gone up for the quarterbacks, but the salary cap has risen much faster than salary growth at pretty much any other position. Quarterback has kept up, and there's a couple other ones who have as well. But for the most part, most positions lag the salary cap growth by a lot. So I think teams look at this now and say, you know what, we could deal with a $25 million cap hit for a player. It doesn't look great, but in terms of the percentage of the overall cap space they have to spend, it's really not that much different than, maybe would have been an $8 million, $10 million hit, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So I think that also plays a role in it as well, is that teams just have more money, I guess, at their disposal than usual. Next year notwithstanding, that's again, different kind of year, but in general, I think more and more teams are finding themselves to have more and more money that they can use in structuring these contracts than they ever had before.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see what the quarterback market looks like this offseason, because even this year, teams been much more successful in the drafting quarterbacks in the recent years than they have been in the past. I mean, you had, Andy Dalton go as a backup somewhere, Cam Newton goes a backup somewhere, Sam Darnold probably moving from one place to another, Carson Wentz maybe moving to another. So there does seem to be a little bit of a market in free agency. I mean, maybe not enough to really to take a risk on, because you still had teams like the Bears trading to get someone like Nick Foles rather than wait around to see who's going to be left
Yeah,
when
and
the chairs are pulled away.
I think what happened with the Bears too, the one that really threw me off was Winston. I never expected Winston to go for just $1 million. There's a range of outcomes I could have come up with for him. Nothing ever would have come close to that. I don't think in the Bears case they thought there was really going to be access to some of these other guys who were available. I think they thought that the cost was going to be much higher. If Winston even comes in around 20, which, that's where Bridgewater comes in, that's the logical landing spot for him, 2022, 23, they probably can't fit that. So I am sure they looked at that and said, okay, well, we've got this Foles guy and he's willing to restructure his deal to do, $6 million a year or something like that. We can fit that in without a problem. That's going to be our best option because we can't afford any of these other guys. And I think that was kind of what happened. And I think everything else was, for me, at least, it caught me off guard. The Winston really, sitting around until June, basically, as a free agent. Cam Newton, I knew Cam wasn't going to go for what some people thought once he got cut. But again, I didn't expect him to go for $1 million. I figured at least you're looking at $10 million, $8 million, for somebody like that.
To start also. So that's
yeah. It's
Yeah.
not even like he was going in a place to compete. I mean, it was just, they brought him in and you knew he was going to be the starter as long as his arm was capable of doing anything. So, maybe that changes the equation a little bit for some teams. Maybe they're going to look at this and say that, there are going to be more options out there in the near future that they can take a gamble on rather than having to go the Foles route in a trade or some of these other players in a trade. But I don't know. I don't know if last year is just going to prove to be unique. I have no idea, but those couple of contracts really caught me off guard completely.
Yeah. I kind of forgot about Winston there. And then, I don't know, depending upon how this season ends, maybe even Marcus Mariota. I know he's got another year left with the Raiders, but I mean, that's a $10 million deal. So they could at least trade him if they wanted to keep Carr, or trade Carr if they wanted to go with Mariota.
Yeah,
I guess they have,
I
have some stuff there too.
Yep. Yeah, I would think one of those quarterbacks is probably going to go next year. They'll see what they can get in a trade for one of the two. I don't think they'll release either of them, but I think you explore the market to see what's there, especially because they're another team. Now they have a lot of salary cap flexibility, but right now they project to be over the cap as well, and obviously they have a lot of holes on that team to fill. So if they can keep Mariota next year for $10 or $12 million cap hit, plus incentives that he can earn if he starts. Versus Carr, who's probably $25-26 million. I could at least see maybe some of the logic in doing that. And if you trade Mariota and you can even just get a second round pick for him, that's worth it. To do that, to try to rebuild what's just a terrible defense and really a lot of holes on that offense, even though they've played okay at times.
Now, one other position that I wanted to ask you about, is that really the edge rusher and the defensive line, because we talked about how a lot of salaries haven't really gone up dramatically. Now, these deals that we saw, maybe not Garrett as much as the deal that we saw for Joey Bosa. I mean, that's a $27 million a year deal. I mean, that's big. It's starting to make me think for, drafting, like they drafted Nick Bosa in San Francisco and then Chase Young and these other guys. Like, are you going to be able to have one of these guys on your team if you don't have a rookie contract or substantial salary relief somewhere else? I was blown away by the Bosa contract.
Yeah, because now see, this is dramatically changed the market, and it took a long time for these guys to really get to 20. Mac got there, and it still took a little bit of time before the other guys kind of broke through. You're going to be at $30 million for TJ Watt in the blink of an eye. I mean, it's a lot if once we get to that level, and it's so high. I don't know. I'm not sure if you can really pair that with a veteran quarterback. I mean, if you do that, you really have to cut costs somewhere else. And I don't know if that's worth it to do. So I would think teams are going to have to reevaluate that a little bit. Again, this might be something where you talk about having talent kind of in the pipeline. If you draft a rusher, with your number one pick in 2021, maybe you should be looking in 2023 to do the same. This way, again, when that contract situation comes up, you can always find a team like the Bears. You can find that team where you can get 2 first-round picks probably for a guy that you're going to pay $30 million to. And to me, that would be worth it, especially if you had somebody else on your roster that you already know can sack the quarterback, who's a lot cheaper. But yeah, I think they're really going to have to think about those things, even just in terms of just positional values. When you had all your pass rushers between 18 and say $20 million, and all your top cornerbacks are 15 million, it's like, okay, that's a legitimate debate you can have. There's about $5 million separating them. If I can get 2 cornerbacks for $15 million for the cost of one pass rusher, that makes a lot more sense to me, I think, than just going with the one guy on the defensive line, because the disparity in salary is so big. I think it really needs it might change the way some of these teams start to build a little bit, if those salaries really continue to escalate like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the cornerbacks, it's probably you probably need more than one good one a lot of the times now in the NFL. So maybe that would be a reason it's depressing their salaries a little bit. Um, I guess there are guys like Jalen Ramsey who maybe you can build around a little bit better and they can justify it. But I think that's difficult to play out. I guess we'll hit running back contracts because we have to talk about running backs and whether they matter or not. But obviously, I think you're in agreement. I mean, I've heard you talk about this. You're kind of with the idea that re-signing these guys, our guy is the special guy. Our guy, I know it didn't
Yeah,
work for those 17 guys before, but
yeah.
for
But
our for
our
our guy,
guy's the one.
our guy's the one. Like that thinking isn't going to work. But my question is, okay, so I've been looking at this Chubb contract. What's going to happen with Nick Chubb in Cleveland? Only because I have the opinion that these guys are forward-thinking guys that have come in there. They didn't draft him. Dorsey drafted him. They came in. They brought in Kareem Hunt. They extended Kareem Hunt. Nick Chubb is now 3 years into his 4-year second round contract. What can you do though? Like even if you say I'm not going to sign this guy, is there a viable alternative other than saying, you know what, I'm going to write out the value in this contract and then let him go?
Yeah, I
Like,
think
can you
that's pretty
trade
much
one?
it. Once in a blue moon, you can probably find a trade partner. You got to find the right kind of organization that has that kind of, the older school, I guess, general manager, older school philosophy. The Dave
You got to
Gettleman
find a
type.
sucker,
You find,
basically.
yeah, you find someone like that, and they're maybe willing to make that trade for him. But there's not going to be much of a market, because even if you look at free agency, none of these running backs who go to free agency, other than Bell, who found the big sucker in the Jets, they don't make out nearly as well. You look at Gordon last year going into free agency, and ended up 2 years, $8 million a year, when he was turning down, I think it was 10 million a year from the Chargers, because he thought it wasn't enough, based on what other players had done. Even when you go back to the DeMarco Murray era, and those players, they hit free agency off. He probably had 1,800 yards that year. People were talking about him, reaching Adrian Peterson money at the time, and he had to go sign with the Eagles for 8 million or so a year, and ends up being traded after one season. So I don't think there's much of a market. I think the only thing that you can do, you try and ride those players out, and if you want to keep them, um, I think you just have to paint a picture to their agents that's just as realistic as possible, which is, hey, look, this is a list of all the players who've gone to free agency. If you want to take this to free agency, go right ahead. You're going to get a worse deal than what we're giving you. If you want to do that out of pride, or some sense of just some sense of whatever, because of what everyone else has done that's a mistake, you go right ahead and you do that. But the best offer that we can give you is $10 million a year. That's more than you're going to get anywhere else. Take it or leave it. And I think that's what they have to do, instead of what they've done now. There's been a couple exceptions. I mean, the Kamara deal is nowhere near as big as it actually is stated to be, because they just put as much money as possible in that final year of the contract to boost the annual value. So when it got reported, it would be reported like it was an Ezekiel Elliott kind of contract. So, I mean, that's another thing that you can do to kind of bridge that divide if you want to, just throw in a year where, the player's never going to see it. But otherwise, I mean, you got to keep your flexibility with cutting the players and moving on and not having that kind of money sunk in them, because it just doesn't work out. There's no example that's there that is like a meaningful running back in the last, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years. I'm not even sure how much it would be. I mean, Peterson had a long career in Minnesota. I don't think any of the success that Minnesota had in the years where they came close, you would say, yeah, that was all Adrian Peterson. Um, so I'm not even sure what the example would be. Usually it's like a 1 year, they have a crazy season, like a Chris Johnson or something like that. David Johnson in Arizona, the 1 year where maybe you can kind of try to convince yourself that's the guy that makes it work. And it just never happens again, and it's not even like they come close to the career years. It's just, usually it's just over, there's just nothing there that's positive. So I don't know. I don't know why teams continue to do it. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. And yeah, if Cleveland, if Cleveland is smart, if they really take a forward thinking approach, I think that's what they have to do. They take it, leave it, give a reasonable, whatever that reasonable number is that they can deal with, and say, that's what you can have. Otherwise, maybe we'll play it twice a year if you go sign with, the Ravens or someone like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess officially Henry's on his new deal, so maybe people point to that and his season, despite the fact that Tannehill's playing pretty well, and that kind of has a lot to do with how successful they're being there.
I mean, I like I like watching Henry play. I mean, he's fun to watch. He he's like a freight train going out there sometimes, and when he gets in the open field and gets moving, I mean, he's a fun player to watch. And if he happens to get 4 years or 3 years out of that contract, that's wonderful. Maybe, then maybe he'll be the one guy. But even now, even if you want to look at this and say, okay, this is the one, well, yeah, it's still, they could have just had him for this year on the franchise tag. If things fall apart next year, you start to question it then. And it's like, why did we do this? Why did we get into this for longer than we really had to? Then I think that's really when you have to really start looking at the time frame, is when it gets past that option year / franchise year period, to see really how the play goes.
All right. Well, Jason, thanks so much for your time. I know we've covered a lot here. Maybe I'll ask you one last question. I have to know,
Sure.
as someone who's been a Jets fan for so long. I don't know if you know Eric Eager here at PFF. But
yeah, I know Eric. Yep.
Yeah. So he was. He still is, in my opinion, a Vikings fan, but then he kind of developed this Chiefs fandom, and
Yes,
now
the Chiefs fandom. Yes.
now he's pretending to be a Chiefs fan. So I have to know, as a Jets fan, you have to have like a backup fandom or something. Like you have to have a mistress, basically, a team mistress
not
on the
really.
side. Or are you really committed to this Jets team?
No, it's pretty much just the Jets. The other stuff that really is there with the teams is just, as you meet more people throughout the league, you just kind of like, my buddy works there. I hope they have a good season. If the Jets don't make the playoffs, and the Jets never make the playoffs, so I'll maybe choose one or two teams from there. It's like, oh well, I know a couple guys there, so I'd like it if they did well, because that would help them out. But otherwise, that's pretty much all that it is. It's not anything else. The Jets are the only team that I'll sit there and suffer through and deal with them year after year. And I can't make myself try to get happy by finding another team being like, yeah, now I'm a Seahawks fan because they might win this year. I can't do that. So,
Okay.
Yeah, no, I haven't gone that route.
Well, the dedication, the commitment there is admirable. I'll give that to you. Once again,
That
everyone out
admirable
there.
or stupid, I don't know.
Well, it's a thin line between the two. So everyone follow Jason, like I mentioned, on Twitter at Jason_OTC. Listen to his podcast. Thanks so much for the time, man, and enjoy not having to worry about having to deal with a team during the playoffs. You can just you can hang out, you can do whatever. You have free time during the holidays.
We'll focus on some DFS games or something. We'll see.